survey findings that I have seen. All right. Next slide. This is me. My name is Marge McFarlane. I am a consultant. I have over 48 years of experience in the healthcare industry. I come from the laboratory and I have done a lot of my work in hospitals, but most recently have moved into ambulatory surgery centers as a life safety surveyor and consultant. And so my background is in infection control, environment of care, emergency management, mock facility surveys and supporting documents. I hold several degrees and I've authored several books, mostly OSHA books on hazardous chemicals. What we're going to talk about today is risk assessments. And the purpose of risk assessments is to decide what policies and procedures we need to follow. And the most important thing about risk assessments is you cannot risk assess yourself out of requirements, laws, and standards. We're going to talk about the top challenging standards, and we're going to talk about the challenging adventures of managing life safety in an ambulatory surgery center where you may not have experts. Then Marissa is going to speak for a while, and we'll have plenty of time for Q&A at the end. So let's start at the beginning, life safety codes. And you kind of like take a deep breath. We just want to talk about why does it matter? And the purpose of the life safety code is to provide regulations on how your ambulatory surgery centers are built to protect your patients from the products of combustion, really smoke and fire, because many of you are impairing the consciousness of the patients you see. If you are doing deep or general anesthesia, you are impairing the consciousness of your patients so that they cannot get out of the building by themselves. And that is where the strictest rules apply. If you're only doing moderate sedation, you still need to be built to CMS ambulatory surgery center standards. Okay, but there's some lesser strictness in the amount of your type and size of your generator, the amount of your medical gas, and things like that. So the life safety code is the guide for building ambulatory surgery centers that has been in place by CMS since 1967, which is a very long time ago. And the current edition that we are using right now was adopted in July of 2016. And we are talking about the Life Safety Code 101-2012 and the National Fire Protection, which is NFPA, Healthcare Facilities Code 99-2012. So why does this matter? When you are being surveyed, it will depend if you are under new ambulatory surgery center rules or existing. And existing means you were built before July 5th of 2016. Anything built after that, any plans approved for building after 2016, all fall under the new chapters and all the new codes need to apply. Okay, so these talk about how you are built. How many 1-hour walls do you need? How many 2-hour walls do you need, depending on the size of your building? What kind of fire alarm system you need, sprinklers, generators, air pressure relationships. Existing ORs need 15 air exchanges in the ORs. New need 20. Humidity is the same for everybody. Egress is the path to get out, and storage. It talks about emergency lighting, fire extinguishers and drills, and then medical equipment, all the way from biomedical equipment to OR tables, stretchers, IVs, all of those kinds of things, including ventilators, and what must be available. If you are remodeling, Chapter 43 addresses all repair, renovation, modification, reconstruction, change of occupancy, or addition. And in the code, those all mean very specific things. Okay, so repair can be like patch and paint. Okay, but the moment you go into renovation, it depends on what system are you touching. Are you touching the sprinkler system? If you're existing, you may need to bring it up to the new codes. And again, that's a whole long, complicated discussion with your state building codes. But I wanted to find, if you say, well, we're thinking about doing this, what do we need to do? In NFPA 101, 2012, Chapter 43 is where you go to look to see what you might be up against. And I really need to stress that NFPA 101, 2012 is not identical to the International Building Codes, but is often used for building occupancy. So when I go around and I consult new ambulatory surgery centers, the architects are usually used to building clinics. And so they're using clinic codes, and that's not sufficient. Because you need to be built to a higher level of fireproofness, if you will, because you're impairing the consciousness of your patients. And some clinic designers are excellent clinic designers, but they may not be familiar with Chapter 20 of NFPA 2012, and especially NFPA 99 2012. They're looking at the 1999 edition, which is no longer valid. If you have a state that says you can be built to either NFPA or International Building Codes, that's fine. CMS says that's fine, but the strictest codes apply. So I know that the IBC has exemptions for exiting, and NFPA does not. And so we need to be sure that we have the right path forward, or it will cost us a lot in rework. All right, risk assessments. Risk assessments need to occur when you have a variety of options for how you handle things, or if it's a gray area and you're not sure what to do. And the point of risk assessment is to answer a question. So there's many questions in the universe, and one of them is patient harm, related specifically to medical gas and emergency generator power that you need in your building based on the type of patients you are serving and the services you provide to them. Okay, so in NFPA 99, 2012 edition, Chapter 4, it says, thou shalt do a risk assessment for patient harm if your med gas system fails or your emergency or your normal power fails. Okay, and so we address this by categories. All right, so category 1 is the one that can cause major damage, injury, or death to patients or caregivers if the normal power goes out and you have no backup power. Okay, so if you're doing deep and general anesthesia, you have to have a category 1 system for both generators, a type 1 generator and a type 1 med gas system, because the anesthesia machines are breathing for the patients. And you know what happens when the power goes out and machines are not working. Okay, category 2 talks about failure. Such equipment is to cause minor injury to patients or caregivers. So if you are doing moderate sedation or less, okay, if the power fails, you might have some battery backup lights, okay, but the machines are not breathing for people, and it would be inconvenient, okay, but it's not likely to cause death. Category 3 then talks about failure of equipment not likely to cause injury or death or caregivers, but can cause patient discomfort. And usually I see category 3s in regular like dental clinics and things. And then category 4 is which the equipment would have no impact on patient care. And there's very few ASCs that fall under category 4. Okay, whereas a clinic might, but clinics are not required to do risk assessments. So if you are new, that means built after 2016, you need to talk about what services you are providing. If you are doing deep sedation or general anesthesia, you have to be a category 1. And that is what you would fill out on your application for survey. I often see people say 3, and they are really doing general anesthesia, and that's a disconnect. The other challenge I have is if you are purchasing a building that was built for different types of clinical procedures. True story. I went to visit an ambulatory surgery center that had just been acquired, and they were going to do orthopedic surgery. Well, the building was built to do eyes. Okay, so eyes can be a category 2 or a category 3 because you're not impairing the consciousness of the patients. So I walk in and they are now doing general anesthesia, and they did not have the generator and they did not have the med gas system to support that. And there was a disconnect. I am concerned that the world of ASCs lives in silos. You know, facilities knew what they had, but they weren't talking to the clinical people about what level of sedation are they doing. And so they had to stop all services until they could get a new generator, expensive, and improve the med gas system, expensive. So again, usually I see category 1 or category 2. New ambulatory surgery centers cannot put in a category 3 generator anymore. But if you have a category 3 generator, it can continue if you are doing moderate sedation or less. All right. Another kind of risk assessment that's requested during your survey is the wet location risk assessment. With the new NFPA 99, oh, I did not mean that at all. I apologize. Come on. There we go. I'm sorry. With the new edition of NFPA 99, it says all ORs are wet locations. Now, if you are doing orthopedics, if you're doing urology, you know that to be true. If you are, or endo, you know that could be true. Okay, but if you're doing eyes or a little pain management, or those kinds of procedures, that is not true. And so I have for you the definition of wet procedure locations from the code book itself, because people go like, where do you see this? Where do you find this information? Okay, so it's in NFPA 99 2012, chapter 6.2.2.8, 6.3.2.2.8. Wet procedure locations shall be provided. In regulatory words, shall means must. Should means, it's a good idea. With special protection against electric shock. So it's all about the combination of electricity and water. It says definition. The 2012 edition defines wet procedure locations as the area in patient care room where the procedure is performed that normally is subjected to wet condition while the patients are present, including standing fluids on the floor, drenching of the work area, either of which condition is intimate to the patient or the staff. So that means within 6 feet. All right. And you go like, well, we are not slopping water all over our ORs. And I say, good on you. Okay, but you need to do this risk assessment to prove that you either need to protect your power or you're good to go. So many of you will recognize this red GFCI outlet, right? It's the one that has the little test and reset button in the middle, and the little green dot says I'm good to go and I'm powered. All right, that means that's a ground fault circuit interrupter. That means if there's water and it has too much current going through, it will turn off the power to that circuit so that no one gets a shock and no one gets electrocuted. And that's the plan. So you can see those little red GFCIs, and those are appropriate in ORs. Or you can go big and you can see the picture of the line isolation monitor. And they're, I see them almost always as shiny silver gray panels in different sizes. This is just one I found a picture of that you can see. And it's common in many ORs. And the reason is, in the beginning of time, we used flammable anesthetic agents. We used ether. And so a little shock will blow up your OR. Okay, we have been using non-flammable anesthetic gases for decades now. And so then people said, well, we really don't need to pay to install ground, the line isolation monitors because they're very expensive, but they protect the entire room from excessive current related to water. So if you have one of those line isolation monitors, okay, I have to say that it requires a monthly test and an annual test, and you need to document that. The GFCIs need a monthly test. And so again, an inventory for all of the GFCIs that are read, and then a monthly test to be sure that it's lit and that it has the tensile strength when you pull out the little plug. Okay, the new code says operating room shall be considered a wet location unless a risk assessment is conducted by the healthcare governing body and determines otherwise. All right, so there is an ASHE form, American Society of Healthcare Engineers, and I have a picture of one on the next page, is the most commonly used tool that I have seen. And so it talks about all the different things that are happening in your OR. And if you have a score under a certain number, then you are not a wet location. All right, so you fill one out for each OR that you have, right? You send it to your safety committee, and then you have it reviewed and approved by the governing board, and put it in the minutes and have that document of board approval readily available for survey, because people will ask, surveyors will ask. Okay, and you need to review it if you change the procedures in your OR. If you did not have a wet location and now you're providing wet location procedures, you want to be sure that you reassess it if your services change. And that is, I put that in red because that's what I see. They think it's one and done. And it is if your providers don't change and the procedures that they do don't change. So soon somebody's got to kind of be overseeing this to make sure that we're still doing the same procedures. So new equipment, some people say, oh, I have a Neptune system. Well, a Neptune system is really helpful for stopping blood and body fluids and water from getting all over the floor. So that's helpful in proving that you do not have a wet location. All right, ASHE, again, American Society of Healthcare Engineering. You can go to the website and it talks about how do you do this. You complete the questionnaire, use your worst case scenario, complete the assessment for each OR with different functions. Okay, after each question, go yes or no. A numerical value is assigned to each question. Okay, so on the right-hand side, can you see all those cords that are all over the floor? All right, and so that if water is on those, you are going to have a potential electric shock hazard. Okay, one would hope in this day and age, right, that you do not see cords of that magnitude all over the OR floors, because not only are they a wet location hazard, they are a trip hazard to your providers, and that's inconvenient. Okay, so if your sum of the results is under 10, it is not considered to be a wet location. So you'd have like OR1, you'd answer the questions. My score is 6. It is not a wet location. You have that approved by the board. It's a safety committee thing. And then you have a document then to provide for your surveyor. So where do you get the most points? The most points are scored for having fluid on the floor or having line power cords within 6 feet of the patient. The key area is within 6 feet in a circle around the operating table. Okay, that's considered the patient location. All right, so those are 2. There's many other risk assessments that need to be done based on what questions you are asking. So the first one is the infection prevention risk assessment for construction. And so you've heard about ICRAS and you've heard about PICRAS. So ASHE, again, American Society of Healthcare Engineer, has put out a construction 2.0 tool, which is free to everyone. And those documents will be in your resources within 5 to 7 days so that you can see them. And what ASHE did is, the ICRA has been around since 2001. Okay, and I, as a healthcare person, well, it doesn't meet all the needs. It doesn't meet all the needs of, because it was started with construction. Okay, and now it's changed its name to activity because I need to include infection prevention, i.e., how many ceiling tiles can I pop, right, for maintenance? So they changed the name to activity. So category 1 activity talks about popping a few ceiling tiles and looking around, and B is kind of a maintenance kind of thing where can do a little work but don't create any dust. C, of course, is where you're creating dust and you start putting up barriers, right? And then D is out and out renovation or construction. And so you're familiar with those 4 at activity levels. Okay, but what they've changed significantly, and I wholeheartedly agree with Marge's opinion, is the risk category of impaired patients. Before, they had outpatient areas as lower risk, and I disagree strongly because outpatients are not your deal. I mean, you have only outpatients, but you don't admit people for long periods of time. But there's a minimal category where there's no patients. There's the second category is for inspection and maintenance activities only. And then C, level 3, 4, and 5 talk about how sensitive your patients are. So I was visiting an ambulatory surgery center, and they're doing a remodel in the OR itself, but they're still doing patients. Okay, so that is a high risk process. That is a high risk process. If the barriers fail, the dust is going to get to the patients. And so it just talks about how do you prepare? How do you implement the process? How do you monitor the process? And then how do you clean it up when you're done? So that's the ICRA. The other piece with the ICRA that needs to happen is the assessment of waterborne pathogens during construction, renovation, or low use. So Legionella is the prime mover on this one, but it's also other waterborne pathogens. Pseudomonas is out there, and there's about 5 or 6 things that we really care about a lot. But when you have water not flowing in an area for a time, the water's quiet, the disinfectant from the city water dissipates, and if you have any slime in your pipes, and you do even though you think you don't, right? The Legionella grow, they're fruitful, and they multiply. And then when you turn on the water again and provide a mist, people who are susceptible can breathe it in and they will get Legionella. I mean, that's exactly how it happens. And so during construction, renovation, or low use, if you're shutting off a few rooms because you're not using them, what is your process for flowing water? Now, accrediting bodies and CMS do not require you to have a water management plan. It is a best practice to have some idea of a water management plan and at least keep the water moving in areas that are closed or if they're down for construction and renovation. An important risk assessment is humidity. Okay. With the flammable anesthetic gases, humidity was allowed to be 30 to 60. Because if you get below 30%, you have the risk of a little electric shock, the static shock. And if you have flammable anesthetics, that just helps explode your ORs. Okay, so CMS said, oh, okay, fine. We'll move the lower humidity range down to 20. And so the code says that you can use 20 to 60 humidity range for ORs and sterile storage. All right. What I need to bring to your attention is the ASHRAE standard. That is the one CMS has adopted. So ASHRAE is American Society of Heating and Refrigeration and Air Conditioning Engineers. Okay, so it's a consensus standard, but the Appendix D of the ASHRAE standard requires relative humidity to be maintained between 20 to 60%. But you must consider sterile supply and medical equipment manufacturers' instructions for use regarding required humidity levels prior to any humidity level adjustment. So I can tell you, if you go back, if you've got a 20 to 60 policy at your facility, the moment you're off the call, you call someone and have them look at the sterilizer challenge packs. So those would be your indicators to say that your sterilizer worked. Most manufacturers still use 30 to 60. Okay, and so failure to maintain manufacturers' required humidity levels will avoid the sterile packaging result in medical equipment malfunction or failure. So people say, oh, we use 20 to 60 in our ORs, and that's fine, and in our sterile supplies. And so then I'm out there hunting for those items that the manufacturers say you have to have 30 to 60. Marge's opinion, if you can manage 30 to 60 in your facility, go for it. Because what this requires then is a risk assessment of all of your products to prove they can live between 20 and 30. And I think that's a very labor-intensive activity. Okay, so when we think about who's in charge, what rules do we have to follow? We have to follow the CMS conditions of participation. Okay, and then we have to follow law and regulation. So OSHA, bloodborne pathogens, respiratory protection, hazardous chemicals, ergonomics, workplace violence. Those are all OSHA federal laws. Okay, and then it comes down to manufacturer's instructions for use. If the manufacturer says you have to do this, you have to do this. And that is why the GFCI outlets, those red outlets, need to be tested monthly, because the manufacturer's cut sheet requires you to do that. So if you don't have your facility person here and you go back and say, we got to have an inventory and test these monthly, they'll go, what? And you say, look at the manufacturer's cut sheet, and it'll say they have to be tested monthly. And you cannot risk assess that out. You can't say, well, they've never failed, so I don't have to do it. All right. And then it goes to national guidelines and consensus standards. So we think about CDC and the World Health Organization, and then we go to society consensus standards like ANSI and ASHRAE and those. Okay, but that's the hierarchy of control. And again, the strictest rule applies. If CMS doesn't say, but somebody else says, and it's stricter, that's the rules we have to follow. Okay, so what I see is people using 20 to 60, and they don't have a risk assessment for to prove that all of their goods can live between 20 and 60. So I go find the ones that don't live, and then they have to do something about it. Either get a different product, right, that has been tested down to 20, but it's cost a lot of money for the manufacturers to prove that their products are effective till the out date in a lower humidity. And so many of them have chosen not to do it. And that's why it still says 30 to 60. Or get a little cabinet where you can control the humidity in that. And that's expensive also. All right. Challenges. You have multiple hats. Life safety is such a specialized field. And I'll bring to you again, if you're taking care of patients, right, you're doing vital signs on them all the time to assess, do they need help or are they good to go? When we do life safety things, sprinklers, generators, boilers, chillers, et cetera, exit lights, bug eye lights, it's kind of like you push the button and the battery works for 30 seconds. So you say, fine, check. But what we're doing is testing the building to see if it needs some help or if it's good to go in an emergency when you're counting on us to protect you from the products of smoke and combustion. So you don't need us life safety folks until you need us life safety folks. And the purpose of us life safety folks is to keep your building so that you can protect your patients and yourselves. So the challenge I have is that staff may not know what is required. If all of a sudden you're doing these monthly checks on these things for which you have limited information, you don't even know that it's required. I'm going to talk about some of the top survey findings. And that's why I think that they're in there, is because people don't know. And I think that Accurate Accreditation can help you out on some of those things. You want to consider checklists for weekly and monthly testing. And I know that the Accurate Accreditation app has those things lined out so that you can teach someone to do these things. keep commissioning documents handy. The red, ensure a smooth transition between construction and occupancy. I do a lot of early option surveys. So they've been constructed, they've been blessed by their local and state authorities. Okay, and the construction people turn the building over to the ASC. And so I come in, and the ASC has done its 10 cases, and it's now applied for early option survey. And it may be a month, it may be 2, it may be 3, depends on what they're doing to get Medicare deemed status, right? All right, and so I ask for these monthly checklists, and you get the really quiet room and nobody looking at you, because construction did it during construction. All right, and so the smooth transition between construction and occupancy means that these checklists have not been passed down the line. There's been no bridging the silos. I see construction as a silo, I see occupancy as a silo, and you need to build those bridges of communication about what do I need to do now? What do I need to do now? What does it mean to do it? Where do I document it? And how often do I have to do it? And again, Accurate Accreditation can help you with some of those documents. The biggest finding I see is you need to schedule the damper testing from 1 year from installation, not from building occupancy. So they built the building, they have the smoke and fire dampers in your 1 hour walls, if you have them, and they test them before everything is done. As they commission the HVAC system, they test the dampers, but you may not have occupancy for another 4 months. And so the standard says, thou shalt test the damper 1 year from 1 year after installation, and every 6 years thereafter. So when I come, if you've been open a while, maybe 14 months, I will ask for that 1 year testing. And again, I get the blank look because they did not know they needed to do it. Construction knew, but where's the handoff of the checklist that people need to schedule in advance? All right. And then you want to verify there's no penetrations in the 1 hour smoke or fire walls. I see this happening after IT upgrades. You build your building, okay, and then IT gets an upgrade, and they're in there running data cables, for everyone who needs it in a certain spot, okay, but they're not connected to the firewall where they are not fire stopping them as required. So if you do not fire stop the smoke wall and firewall, then smoke in one compartment, right, will blow through that hole, doubles in size every 20 seconds, right? And that is the products of smoke and combustion that we're trying to protect our patients who are on your tables, sleeping, so that they can evacuate safely. Frequent survey findings. The number one finding I find is air pressure relationships. Okay, you have to monitor your temperature and humidity and the airflow in the OR with acceptable standards. This is an infection control, odor, and promoting patient comforts. ASCs must maintain the records that demonstrate they've maintained acceptable standards. Accurate Accreditation has a combo log built into the software that allows you to record temperature, humidity, and airflow and pressure. Okay, so when I think about airflow, I think about air exchanges. When I think pressure, I think about, is the air going out of the room, which is positive, right? Or being sucked into the room, which is negative. So all your ORs need to be positive, right? The air needs to be blowing out of the OR at a significant rate, at 1/100th of an inch of water. 1/100th of an inch of water. So I don't care if you use a ball on the wall. I don't care if you use a little manometer on the wall. I don't care how that goes. Or you can use a tissue test, and then annually, your air pressures need to be tested again. And to just be sure that everything is what it's supposed to be. Existing ORs, 15 air exchanges. So many outside air exchanges, so many recirculated air exchanges. Okay. New ASCs after 2016, 20 air exchanges. So you have to prove every year that the mechanics haven't failed, because these are all mechanical items. The air handlers are mechanical pieces. So they've got valves, they've got dampers, they've got all kinds of mechanical parts that can fail, and you don't feel the difference. We're not that sensitive, but it needs to be tested to prove that it's just right for infection prevention. Okay, and so an example of acceptable ventilation is in the ASHRAE standard, right? Society for Heating, Refrigeration, and Air Conditioning Engineers. We've talked about that 170 and the ventilation of healthcare facilities. And this is enforced and referenced by the FGI guidelines 2010. Now, you can be built to a later edition of the FGI guidelines, depending on what your state requires for design, but then you're held to that standard. Okay. If you were built before 2010, then it's whatever your ventilation standards required. But for sure, 15 air exchanges for ORs. But your sterile supplies, humidity, what's the range? Temperature, what's the range? Positive pressure, decontamination, negative pressure all the time. And when you talk about central sterile, and then it has that pass-through window to decon, and the pressures are off, it's almost always the pass-through window is open. The closing that pass-through window between your adjacent rooms is not a suggestion. It's important for the air balance that be closed tightly all the time. So that's the number one finding. And that's a significant finding. So depending on who your accrediting agency is, that's called a condition level finding, and that will get you a repeat visit. And if you're being surveyed for the first time, that will give you a denial of accreditation, and you'll need to reapply and do the whole survey again. So it's just a very significant finding, but it's infection prevention. Hazardous materials management comes in at number 2, in my opinion, right? And the most missing piece is the annual eyewash station inspection. So ANSI is the consensus standard, ANSI Z 358.1, that OSHA references, and this annual inspection is in addition to your weekly checks. So many of you have to have an eyewash station if you have decon, right? And hazardous chemicals. And so I see many people doing weekly checks. The challenge I see in weekly checks is that they're turning the water on and they are not assessing what is required. Okay, so I went into a facility, I had them turn on the eyewash station, and the water force was not sufficient to pop the caps off the eyewash eyepieces. You're missing the point, right? You need more pressure than that. The cap should pop off, and you should have two, if you have a 2-stream kind of thing rather than a flow, it should be 2 even arcs at about 8 inches, evenly pressured at the right temperature, 60 to 100. All right. And so I see people checking eyewash stations every week. They just check them off. They check them off. And when I run them, they're not doing what's required. That's because on their checklist, there's no tasks. It says run the eyewash station. So they do. Okay. But then what is the criteria you're using to assess, does this meet the standard or not? Current chemical inventory. I see their inventory, it's not dated. You always date your inventory. So then I'll start looking around and compare, and I'll just say, oh, show me the safety data sheet for this product. And they go like, we don't use that anymore. I said, well, how long have you not used it? Oh, it's been years. No. Annual chemical inventory review is important. And related to that then is readily available and current safety data sheets. Now, these can be stored in the SDS records of accurate accreditation, assuming that everyone in the facility has computer access 100% of the time, they know the passcode, and they know where to find them. OSHA says that they have to be readily available. Okay, so it can't be just where I have to go to get someone to help me find a safety data sheet. And so that's the challenge with online storage. It has to be readily available. They need to absolutely know how to get at them right away. All right, and the documented training and required personal protective equipment use. I don't see where people are documenting their training. It has to happen annual and when hazards change. In some states that have their own OSHA, like Michigan, Minnesota, California, Washington, New York. I could go on. Hazardous training, hazardous chemical training has to be documented annually. Other findings, sterilizer maintenance. No documentation or log of sterilizer maintenance. The biological incubators did not either have initial evaluation by a biomed technician or ongoing preventive maintenance. So I'm talking about the little warmers, right? So you've got the two vials with the thermal sensitive spores. It's those pairs that I'm talking about, right? So you put one of the pair in the load and you run the sterilizer. And if the time, temperature, and pressure were sufficient, it will kill all the spores in the vial. Okay, and then you have one that was not heated. And you put the pair of them in a little warmer. And within 24 hours or so, the spores, that the vial that was in the incubator will stay purple. Okay, if the spores were not killed, they will grow and they will metabolize and they turn the indicator yellow. Okay, so what I see is that people aren't making sure that their little spore warmer is working or has ongoing preventive maintenance. And then no evidence that the sterilizers have received the daily, weekly, or monthly maintenance per manufacturer's recommendations. And you go like, what does that require? So you go to your sterilizer book and it will say daily, you shall. Okay, weekly, you shall. Monthly, you shall. And there may even be annual maintenance that's required or after so many loads. And then frequent survey, firewall penetrations. And so you just need to have some process where periodically people go above the ceiling and look at the firewalls to make sure that they are not impaired in any way. All right, I'm going to turn it over to Marissa now.
Okay, thanks so much, Marge. So before we open it up for questions, I just wanted to give a friendly reminder here of the partnership that we have with Medical Physics Training for your staff's education. You can access the Medical Physics Training website through your Accurate Accreditation dashboard in the chat bubble down in the bottom right corner, or if you go to your name in the top right corner and you go to the Help Center, there is a section called Competency Testing, and if you follow the links there, it will take you to the Medical Physics website, where you can reach out to Laura Smith. Her phone number, email, everything is listed there several times where you guys can reach out to Laura to get a 2-day free pass to check out the different courses that she has to offer. So just wanted to remind you guys of that, that is available there. And then next here, basically, we're just going to go ahead and open this up for questions. If you guys will use your Teams chat to type in any questions that you may have for Marge, she is going to be happy to answer those questions the best that she can. So I will read those questions to her. If you need additional information on a specific topic discussed today, you can email me, and my email address is here. And then the ICRA 2.0 from the ASHI website that Marge had discussed, it will be uploaded to the announcements bell and Accurate in about 7 to 10 business days. So you guys will have access to that as well. So I'm going to go ahead and open it up and check the chat here and see if we have any questions. I'm not seeing any questions. Do you guys have any questions for Marge on any of the topics that she discussed today? If so, feel free to type those in the chat.
While people are thinking about what to type in the chat, if any of the listeners have a specific life safety topic that they would like discussed in a webinar format like this, please reach out to Marissa. We're always looking for things that will be of value to you.
Okay, we have a question here from Katie. She asked, is monthly GFCI testing needed in every OR, even if not wet?
Yes. If it's the red GFCIs, that's not related to wet location. It's related to the GFCI outlet itself. Per manufacturer's instructions for use.
Okay, the next question, I'm so sorry. It says here, with a new construction building, are the contractors to hand off any of the checklists they have completed or what is to be done? Are GFCI, okay, there's another question after that, so that's fine.
All right, so in the construction handoff, there should be not only a punch list, okay, but commissioning documents saying they did the initial test and balance of all the airflows in all the rooms. That should be handed off to you. There has to be the initial fire alarm testing. That is a golden document for new ASCs. The fire alarm completion is a document that needs to be maintained in a red box somewhere near your fire alarm panel for the life of your building. Okay, so it's what's called commissioning documents, and these should all be handed off to you when the contractors give you the operational manuals for all of the equipment. And especially if they have any punch list items that are not done that you need to follow up on. And so those things need, and I see them not happening, or if people at the ASC receive them, they do not recognize the importance of them.
Okay, Lisa has another question as well. Are GFCI testing supposed to be tested monthly in bathrooms?
Okay, I would say those are almost always white outlets, and I would look at the instruction sheet. I think that those are not as important as the red. But I have not looked at a cut sheet for a white one.
Okay, and let's see, we have a question from Lauren. It says, I may have missed it, but where can we access chemical risk assessment templates?
I did not provide a chemical risk assessment template. What you need is a chemical list. Okay, so are you talking about an IROSH risk assessment? Possibly. Okay, so the chemical list is the chemical list. All right, the safety data sheets need to be after 2015, and they all need the pictograms. So when you talk about current safety data sheets, they all have to be dated after 2015 and have the little red square on points with the little black icons on them. If it says material safety data sheets on any of your data sheets, those are old, and that would be a citation. You need the most current all the time.
Okay, let's see. Crystalina says, going back to air exchange in the decon room, should it be a negative pressure room?
100% of the time. Yes.
Okay, Eric says, how often should test and balance be done?
CMS says depends on the opinion of the facility, but they define periodically to be annually. So I would say at least annually.
Okay, Lisa says, so those are essentially all the building and equipment certificates.
That's correct. Those are the commissioning documents I'm talking about.
Stacy says, will this presentation be available to view for others at a later date? I found it outstanding. Yes, Stacy, we always store these webinars that we do. If you log into Accurate Accreditation and you go to the chat bubble, or you go to your name in the top right corner and you go to the Help Center, it'll pull up that chat bubble, and you'll go to Show More Categories at the bottom, and you'll go to Educational Webinars. And that's where you'll find some other, we've had some surveyor webinars in the past, and this is our second life safety. So this one will be uploaded in about 7 to 10 days. So you can definitely share those with your team. Bill says, if an OR falls under the required air exchanges on the last air balance report, what is the expected response? Use in-room aerobotics HIPAA machine until fixed. Depends on how much under threshold. hold cases in room. Thoughts, is showing a risk assessed mitigation plan or effort enough?
Excellent question. I would say don't use the room if you can help it. Depends on how much under the threshold it is and what you're doing in the room. You definitely, a HEPA filter does not serve any purpose except to clean the air. That's not helpful. So it talks back then to your HVAC system. So something needs to be done with the HVAC system. So a risk assessment for mitigation would be the best plan. And again, use it as least as possible. It's going to take some time to get an engineer to decide what you need to do to that HVAC system, and it could be very expensive. But that's why you want to watch it annually, so that if it's falling off, you know what to do.
Perfect. We have another question here. William says, all of the outlets have to be GFCI if they are located in the OR existing facility built before 2015? That's a question he's asking.
No. You need some red outlets in an OR and some normal power. Okay. And so if you're built before 2016, what you've got, some have to be red and some should be white. And you need to test the red ones because those are the ones that are going to be GFCI.
Eric here has another question. Are there any regulations for area lighting on emergency generators located outside?
Yes, the standard says that you need a battery powered light in the generator cabinet or on the building shining on the generator cabinet. That is required. You need also one at the transfer switch. You need one at the transfer switch also. And so that is an NFPA 99-2012 under the generator standards. And so if you folks have any follow-up questions and need specific code, please message Marissa and she will message me and we will get back to you with the exact code language to help you sort this out with your people.
Katie asked for GFCI. Are they only needed in wet environments?
No, they're needed in all environments. Okay, the GFCIs are red and on emergency power. Okay, so just because you don't have a wet location doesn't mean you don't need to continue power if your normal power goes out.
Does anybody else have any questions? I think we've covered all of the ones here in chat, but if you can think of anything for Marge now, you're welcome to go ahead and put that in the chat as we have just about 3 more minutes here. If you have questions that come up later, or you have staff that are going to watch this video later, please instruct them to just reach out to me with any questions they have, and I can always reach out to Marge.
I want to thank you for your questions and your attention. I always enjoy sharing what we need to know to keep our patients safe all the time.
Okay, so everybody's just, okay, we got one more question here. If we have 2 facilities, one built before 2016 and one after, but one license are both building held to the after 2016 standards.
No, they're each held to when they were built. I'm surprised if you're an ambulatory surgery center that you have 2 buildings under one license. Okay, but that being said, I'm not a licensing expert. What I'm saying is your building itself is built to the standard when it was built. So it'd be really important when you have a surveyor come to make sure they know which is the older building and which is the newer building, because the requirements are not the same. That's why those commissioning documents and testing documents are so critical.
Michelle, I hope that helped. Marge, everybody is saying in the chat, thank you. I want to personally thank you so much. You are such an extreme amount of help for a lot of our customers here at Accurate that have questions. And I know I reach out to you almost, several times a week with those questions. So I appreciate you. Accurate Accreditation appreciates you, and our customers really appreciate you. So Katie said, why surprised about having 2 locations on 1 license?
See, I thought that they were standalone. I mean, I'm just not the licensing expert. I was just surprised at the question. So forgive me for not knowing the answer to that. If you have 2 sites under 1 location, and I can see it now in my mind, it says, do you have any ancillary sites? And the question could be yes, and you'd be all under 1 license. You know what I mean? So I apologize for my confusion.
Okay, awesome. Thank you. Thank you, everybody, for joining today. We will send out an invite when we are going to hold another webinar similar to this. And again, please email me with any questions you have. And thanks again, Marge.
Thank you so much. You all have a good evening.
Thanks, you too.